With Hashem's help, we begin with Sechta Baba Basra, first parak Daf Beis Amud Aleph. So the Mishnah is discussing, and it's a continuation of Masechta Baba Metzia, which discuss partners, people who have a property near each other. In fact, the last parak we learned Tabayis va'Aliyah, the person who two condo owners, one owns the ground floor and the other owns the second floor. So this is a continuation of people who live next to each other. And that's why Baba Kama, Baba Basra, Baba Metzia, Baba Basra is thought to be one Masechta just divided into three parts. Anyway, the Mishnah begins, Hashutafin, you have partners that own a courtyard. So imagine a house in one end of a courtyard and a house in the other end of the courtyard. Sharatzu lasis mechitza b'chatzer, that they want to build a partition in the chatzer. So they want to build a partition in the chatzer, a wall. So they agreed to build a wall. So here is the Mishnah sets out the rules. They build the wall in the middle, and that means each one gives up a little bit of their property to accommodate the wall that's going to divide the property. Now, what the Gemara is going to discuss is a key point of the Mishnah, is that it's only because they agreed to build a wall. What happens if one wants to build a wall, the other doesn't? So the Gemara is going to come to the conclusion that Hezek Re'iyah, just because you can't force the other person to participate in building the wall, just because he could look into your courtyard and see what you're doing, and which is like an invasion of somewhat of his privacy, though it's not his house, it's just looking into your friend's courtyard, that's not considered that you're doing damage to the friend. It's only because sheratzu, the key words is they wanted to build a wall, so they agreed to build a wall in the chatzer. So then they build the chatzer in the emsa, by the dividing line between the two properties. Again, you have two houses at the end of each other, and they're facing each other. And there's, let's say, a 50-yard line. At that point, each one gives a little bit of their property to build this wall. And it depends what kind of material do you use for the wall. There are four types of bricks that you can use. So whatever the custom is to build walls out of either gvil, gazes, kfis, and levanim, you build. Hakoil kamilin medina. You always follow the rules of the state that you're in, and you build the wall accordingly. So now the Mishnah just says that like this: if they're using gvil type of bricks, which is unchiseled bricks, zeh nois and gimel tefachim, v'zeh nois and gimel tefachim. So if you're going to use high land, we just began the Mishnah. If we're going to use a gevil type of brick to build this wall, so you have two people living opposite each other, one house at one end of a courtyard, the other house at the other end of the courtyard, and they agreed to build a wall at the midpoint. So the Mishnah says you follow the rules, the building code rules of the state that you're in. So if they're gvil, if they're using gvil, zeh nois and gimel tefachim, zeh nois and gimel tefachim. If they're using the gvil type of brick, then each one has to give up 3 tefachim of his property to accommodate the brick. The brick is 6 tefachim, so each one will give the 3 tefachim, because the gvil width is 3 tefachim. Big gazes, if they're using the gazes type of brick, zeh nois and tefchaim umechza, v'zeh nois and tefchaim umechza. If they're using the gazes brick, which is 5 tefachim, so then each one will give 2.5 tefach for his brick, and 2.5 tefach from his property, and 2.5 tefach. The other one will give 2.5 tefach for his property. The kfisim, the width of a kfisim brick is 4 tefachim. So zeh nois and tefchaim. This one will give 2 tefachs. V'zeh nois and tefchaim. This one will give 2 tefachs of his property. But levanim, if they're using levanim type of bricks, so that brick, the width of that brick is 3 tefachim. So again, zeh nois and tefach umechta, v'zeh nois and tefach umechta. Each one will give a tefach and a half of their property to accommodate the building of this wall. Therefore, they both chipped in to the cost of the materials, and they both chipped in equal amount of their property to build a wall. Lefichach, therefore, im nafal hakaisel, if the wall fell down, hamokoim v'ha'avonim shel sheneyam, the place where the wall stood and the stones of the wall belong to both of them because they both paid for it. So they split everything in equally. Now the Mishnah says, V'chein begina. You have two gardens next to each other. So here the Mishnah says, Mokom shenahagu ligdar. If you have two gardens and the state rules, right, says that if you have two gardens near each other, you have to build a wall, a gather, a fence. We can obligate each one to chip in for the wall because since it's not just a plain open courtyard where you play games in, it's actually you're growing fruits, vegetables, whatever you're growing in that garden. So therefore, if the two are adjacent to each other, both will be obligated by the courts to chip in to build a wall to divide the properties. And again, they both will chip in property to accommodate the wall and the building material. Aval bebika, but an open field, let's say a wheat field, right? So then, mokom shenahagu loy ligdar ein mechayv b'naisi. If the custom is, and most of the time the custom was not to make a wall, if you have a wheat field two wheat fields next to each other, adjacent, and one person owns one part and the other owns the other part. So if there's no custom, no rule that you have to build a wall, ein mechayv b'naisi, we don't obligate them to build the wall. Ella imrotza. If one of them wants to build a wall, we can't stop him. First of all, he uses his property to build a wall, and he can't use his friend's property because he didn't agree to build a wall, and he pays for the building material. And he builds the building material, and he makes a little scratch mark or something like that to indicate that he paid for this material for this wall, on the outside of the wall facing his neighbor. Therefore, will know if many years later this wall fell down, the place of where the wall stood and the stones belong to the person that paid for the building. But if they both agreed to build this wall, you build the wall in the middle, and then you make a chazis, a sign from each side, because each side paid for their share of the wall. So because they both agreed. So again, and they're both probably giving up of their property to accommodate this wall. Therefore, if the wall fell down, the place, the avonim and the stone, shneim are split between the two of them because they both agreed to build this wall. Pretty straightforward Mishnah. Now, the Mishnah is going to ask this question: what does this word mechitza mean? That two guys, they have a courtyard. Again, one house is one end, and the other house is the other end of let's say, a football field, and they each share the courtyard in the middle. Shirotzu lasis mechitza, they wanted to make a wall. So mechitza could mean a wall, which we translated as a wall, and what the indication is, they don't have to do it. So, savru my mechitza. What is the word mechitza over here? Guda, a wall. And where do you see the word mechitza means a wall? Kidetanya, like we learned in the Brisa, mechitza sakerem shenifritza. If a guy planted a vineyard right next to somebody else's wheat field, which he's not supposed to do, because by doing so, your grapevines will go into his wheat, and then it'll become klai hakerem, which becomes asr bahana. It'll destroy basically his wheat. So we tell him to make a fence to divide between the vines and the wheat, like milchiks and fleishiks. Chazur v'nifritza. So the guy built the wall. The guy who owns the vines built the grapevines, built the wall, and then it got breached and it fell down. We tell him build it up again, because if you continue to let your vines grow, it's going to prohibit and aser the other guy's wheat field, and you'll be a mazik. You go to Beis Amid Beis. But let's say the guy gave up hope and he says, you know what, I'm not building a wall. And the grapevines grew and extended into the wheat. He made the wheat aser. The Chai Bachriyasa, and he's liable to pay the guy for his wheats that now became Asr because they're called Kalayim. So again, this was closed parentheses over here. What we just saw is that the word mechitza in the Mishnayos means a wall. So you have two people who own a big courtyard, let's say a football field, and they make a wall. If they agree to make a wall on the 50-yard line, that's okay. So the Gemara says, Tama Daratzi, it's only because they agreed to make this wall. Ha loy ratzu, but if they didn't agree to make this wall, ein mechayvin oisoi, then we don't obligate them to make a wall. Because just because they can stare into each other's courtyard, nothing, and it's an invasion of privacy, but it's just a courtyard. So Alma, so we see from here, Hezek Re'iyah, Lav Shmei Hezek. By looking into invasion of privacy, that's not called doing damage. And you can't force somebody who shares a courtyard that looks into somebody else's courtyard to build a wall. Says the Gemara, that's one way to learn the Mishnah. But there is another way to learn the Mishnah. It's a very fine difference. The Ema, let us say, mechitza means plukta. The word mechitza means that you're dividing a property. In other words, let's imagine that you have this two houses again, but not that there's a football 100 yards in between them. There's just in between the two houses is less than 8 amas. So they decide to divide. Not the word mechitza means to put up a wall. Mechitza means to divide. And they're going to divide the property. So each one, let's say it's the difference between one house to another house is a length of 6 tefachim. The courtyard's length is 6 tefachim. They'll divide the three, they'll give each one 3 tefachim. So then they have to build a wall. Because now they're dividing it up. So therefore, the Mishnah says then they have to build a wall. That's one way to learn the Mishnah. But if you learn the Mishnah that way, then the Mishnah is coming to another conclusion. And that means that when one party can stare into the other person's courtyard, that's called invasion of privacy, and he could force the other party to chip in for a wall. So that's another way to learn the Mishnah, that the ratzu means that they want to divide up the land to make a 2 separate courtyards. Therefore, you force them to build a wall. So they don't have a choice to build a wall. So that's another way to learn the Mishnah. The word mechitza means to divide up the property. The word mechzas means divided up. And the Mekevin the Ratzu, since they want to divide this small piece of land and to make it into 2 courtyards, they have to build a wall. Then they have to build a wall against their will. Almost, so we see from here, Hezek Riyah Shmei Hezek, that the Mishnah holds that invasion of privacy is called a damage, and therefore you're going to have to pay for a wall. Each one can force the other side to pay for a wall. So there are 2 important ways to learn the Mishnah. One way to learn the Mishnah comes to the conclusion that Hezek Riyah Lav Shmei Hezek. And therefore, just because you can look into somebody else's property doesn't mean you're damaging him. And therefore, can't force a person to build a wall if he doesn't want to. And another way to learn the Mishnah is that Hezek Riyah Shmei Hezek. And therefore, if one could stare into his other person's courtyard, you can force one of them can force the other to help chip in for a wall. So 2 ways to learn the Mishnah. The Gemara is just challenging that second way. If you're saying that the word mechza means they divided up, shiratzu lasas mechitza, you say that they want to make a mechitza, it should say shiratzu lachitzois, they want to split. Lachitzois would be a better word, mibayalei. So that's why the second way to learn the Mishnah is not so good. Elamai, you want to say the first way that it means mechitza means a gluda, a wall, boinin esa koisel, then why does it say you build the wall? If the word mechitza means a wall, so it should say boinin oisoi mibayalei. It should continue on talking about the word mechitza, indicating that you're building that mechitza, which is a wall. Why does it say the word koisel? So that's not good with the first way of learning. So the Gemara says, Itana oisoi, if it would just say oisoi, hava mina bim seifam ba'alma. Yeah, I would think that you can build a wall just by using pegs, like, little pegs, and that's enough. Kamash Malan koisel, that you have to build a wall, a thick wall. And we learned that sometimes the bricks could be 6 tvachim wide. But that's why the Mishnah indicates that a mechitza is not just a flimsy wall, flimsy sticks. It means an actual thick wall. That's why it means wall. So no conclusion over here. Is a hezek riyah shmei hezek or lav shmei hezek? The Gemara is going to begin the discussion talking about that pretty soon. But first, the Gemara says, the Gemara examines the Mishnah. Mishnah says, boinin es hakoisel be'emtza. You build the wall in the middle, right? So you build the wall, let's say, at the 50-yard line. So the Gemara says, pshita. If they both agreed to build the wall, right, you build it in between the two. In between, everybody comes to the midpoint, and they build a wall right in the middle. And says the Gemara, like Tzricha, Mishnah is talking about the Kodem Chad V'Ratzui Lechavarei. One agreed that he was going to build a wall. He didn't have to agree to build a wall, but he agreed anyway. So Mahu Desema, I would have thought, Motzi Omalei, he can say, maybe the guy who agreed wants to have second thoughts. Ki Isratzai Loch, when did I agree to build a wall? Ba'avira, a very thin wall that just, splits up the property. But to give up some part of my property to accommodate this wall, I never had that in mind. So we say, no, once you agree to a wall, it's understood that you're going to not only participate in the building material, but you're going to have to give up some of your property to accommodate the wall. But again, the Mishnah, the Gemara now goes with the assumption that behezek riyah lav shmei hezek. Is it looking at somebody? Is that not called a hezek? So the Gemara asks the question, Toshma, we learned in our Mishnah, B'chein Begina. The Mishnah says, by a garden, you are obligated to put up a wall. It means if you have a garden, 2 gardens separating each other, one could force the other to put up a wall. But what's wrong with that? Just because I could steer into your garden, what could be wrong with that? Why is there an obligation to put up a wall? So we see hezek re'iyah, if an invasion of privacy is called a damage. And says the Gemara, Gina Shani, if you're building a garden, yes, you have to build a wall, and each one can force the other to build a wall. Kid Rababa, because what Rababa says, because in a garden you're building fruits and vegetables, you're growing there, and you certainly don't want the other person to give you an ayin hara. Here is a fascinating Gemara, and therefore one can force the other to build a wall. However, when it comes to a courtyard, it's just, you're fixing your car in your courtyard. You're not growing, and it's not your parnasa in your courtyard. So therefore, by the courtyard could be different, that you can't force the other party to chip in for a wall. Rav said, a person's not allowed to stand by his field's friend when the wheat is grown into full bloom, and therefore because he might give an ayin hara. So we see that only this din of forcing the other guy to build a wall is only said by a garden. Says the Gemara, but Amisha says that the garden is similar to a chotzer. And if a garden, you're obligated to build a wall, so then by a chotzer, you could also be obligated to build a wall. So the Gemara says, no, agvil v'gazes. The similarities between a garden and a chotzer was only said by the type of building bricks that you're going to use, but that's it, nothing else. By the building bricks that you're going to use, then there's a similarity between the two, but nothing else. Okay, so now, but a garden you have to build a wall. By a chotzer not. Toshma, come here. Kaisel chotzer shenafal, a wall that fell down. Mechayven, here's the key word. Mechayven oisel livnis adal amas. You're obligated to build it up. If a kaisel of a courtyard that fell, they both have to chip in to build a new wall. So you see, you have to build the walls, but even by a chotzer. And says the Gemara, nafel shiny. If it fell, that means they one time both agreed to build the wall. So they both had an agreement to chip in for this wall. Therefore, even if it fell, they have to rebuild it again. So that's a simple teretz. So this Bryce is talking about they once agreed, they both had an agreement to build a wall. So they both had an agreement to build a wall. So then that agreement still stays. The one who asked the question, what was he asking this question? Such a obvious answer. Answers the Gemara Sefer Itzrachalei, the end of the Brisa. He thought that really, even if they didn't agree, you have to build this wall. But the Mishnah is teaching you a din that if it fell and the original wall was, let's say, 10 amas, then all they have to do is rebuild a 4-amma wall. But not, beyond that, they don't have to. Sefer Itzrachalei. The Mishnah is teaching you, Bryce is teaching you, that from 4 amas and above, you don't have to rebuild that wall. But really, the original wall, you didn't have to have agreement with to build that wall. It's if they even if they both didn't agree, you could be obligated to build a wall because according to the one who asked the question, his opinion is that Hezek Riyah Shmei Hezek. But again, there's no conclusive proof from that brisa. Tashma, come in here. Koifin Oisein Livnais Beishav Adelis Lechatzer. We require the person to build. Let's say you have a courtyard shared by many people. So then everybody has to chip in to build the wall to block the entrance to the common courtyard. It's because the people on the street are looking into the courtyard. Shma Mino Hezek Riyah Shmei Hezek. That we see that invasion of privacy is called a hezek because we're forcing everybody in the courtyard in the homeowners association to chip in for a wall that blocks the view from the street. Answers the Gemara, you're right. Hezek Rabim Shani. When there's a people on the street looking into your courtyard, and many people could stare into your courtyard, yes, there's an agreement that there would be Hezek Riyah. But not so. Not so if you're just two people facing each other. You can't, maybe in that case, there won't be an obligation for one to force the other to chip in for a wall. That means if you're just dealing with one person staring into his friend's courtyard, that wouldn't be enough to force him to chip in for a wall. But Tashma, come in here. The Brisa says you never divide a courtyard unless you can give enough space for each one of them. Let's say you have an open courtyard. So only if you can give 4 amas to one person and 4 amas to another person, then you can divide it up. But if you do have enough space, let's say the whole courtyard is 10, and you can give 5 amas to one and 5 amas to the other, cholkin, you divide it up. Now this word cholkin means you probably build a wall. So we see you have to build a wall. My laba koisel, you have to build a wall. Answers the Gemara, loy b'mispis be'alma. You just put up sticks. The Brisa doesn't need that you need to put up a wall. It means you just put up sticks. One more Tashma, and then we'll stop. Tashma, come in here. Hachaloinis. Bein milmala, bein milmato, bein miknegden dalaramas. You have a guy who has a house, and he has a window. So you're allowed to put up a wall, but you have to put up a very high wall, so that, or a very small low wall, or not too close to his window. These are building codes. V'tana law. If you're living next to him and a guy, your neighbor's house has a window, milmalan, you have to build a tall wall, kadesh layotzitz v'yira, so that you will not be able to stand on the wall and stare into his window. Milmatan, you can make a small wall, is very small below dalaramas, like very small, kadesh layamad v'yira, so you wouldn't be able to stand on that wall and peer into his window. So you have to make it small enough that you wouldn't be able to reach the opening of his window. Miknegdan, and you have to distance yourself from being too close to his window before you build that wall. Kadesh layafel, so you're gonna not, so you don't block the light going into your friend's window. So what you see over there is that you do have, there's halachas of how to build a wall, and you have to be careful not to be able to stare into his window. So we see that hezek riyah is shmei hezek. In the fact that you could look into somebody's privacy, that is called an invasion of privacy, and you can damage that person. So how come? So we see clearly, we can see clearly that the Brisa is concerned about that. And says the Gemara, and here we'll stop. Hazeka debaya shani. when it comes to a house, yes, people do private things in their house. They don't want you steering through their windows. So there, of course, that's hezek riyah. But what we're discussing is when you're looking into somebody's courtyard. So what is he doing in his courtyard? Fixing his car, washing his car, right? Cleaning his bike. So therefore, that's not a hezek riyah. Perhaps hezek riyah in that case, when it's dealing with a courtyard, then that's not shmei hezek, and therefore you cannot force the other person to chip in for a wall. So there must be our Mishnah that says they want to build a wall is because mishum sheratzu, they both agreed that they want to build that wall, and therefore there are rules on how to build that wall. Okay, we'll stop over here. Daf Beis Amud Aleph in Baba Basra.